Chapter 1, Part 3 of The Princess Aline by Richard Harding Davis. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Chapter 1, Part 3. The sea grew calmer the third day out, and the sun came forth and showed the decks as clean as breadboards. Miss Morris and Carlton seated themselves on the huge iron riding bits in the bow, and with their elbows on the rail looked down at the whirling blue water, and rejoiced silently in the steady rush of the great vessel, and in the uncertain warmth of the March sun. Carlton was sitting to leeward of Miss Morris, with a pipe between his teeth. He was warm and at peace with the world. He had found his new acquaintance more than entertaining. She was even friendly, and treated him as though he were much her junior, as is the habit of young women lately married, or who are about to be married. Carlton did not resent it; on the contrary, it made him more at his ease with her, and as she herself chose to treat him as a youth, he permitted himself to be as foolish as he pleased. "I don't know why it is," he complained, peering over the rail, "but whenever I look over the side to watch the waves, a man in a greasy cap always sticks his head out of a hole below me and scatters a barrel full of ashes or potato peelings all over the ocean. It spoils the effect for me. Next time he does it, I am going to knock out the ashes of my pipe on the back of his neck." Miss Morris did not consider this worthy of comment, and there was a long lazy pause. "You haven't told us where you go after London," she said, and then, without waiting for him to reply, she asked, "Is it your professional or your social side that you are treating to a trip this time?" "Who told you that?" asked Carlton, smiling. "Oh, I don't know. Some man. He said you were a Jekyll and Hyde. Which is Jekyll? You see, I only know your professional side." "You must try to find out for yourself by deduction," he said, "as you picked out the other passengers. I am going to Grasse," he continued. "It's the capital of Hohenwald. Do you know it?" "Yes," she said. "We were there once for a few days. We went to see the pictures. I suppose you know that the old Duke, the father of the present one, ruined himself almost by buying pictures for the Grasse Gallery. We were there at a bad time, though, when the palace was closed to visitors, and the gallery too. I suppose that is what is taking you there?" "No," Carlton said, shaking his head. "No, it is not the pictures. I am going to Grasse," he said, gravely, "to see the young woman with whom I am in love." Miss Morris looked up in some surprise, and smiled consciously, with a natural feminine interest in an affair of love, and one which was a secret as well. "Oh," she said, "I beg your pardon. I had not heard of it." "No, it is not a thing one could announce exactly," said Carlton. "It is rather in an embryo state as yet. In fact, I have not met the young lady so far, but I mean to meet her. That's why I am going abroad." Miss Morris looked at him sharply to see if he were smiling, but he was, on the contrary, gazing sentimentally at the horizon line, and puffing meditatively on his pipe. He was apparently in earnest, and waiting for her to make some comment. "How very interesting," was all she could think to say. "Yes, when you know the details it is very interesting," he answered. "She is the Princess Aline of Hohenwald," he explained, bowing his head as though he were making the two young ladies known to one another. "She has several other names, 6 in all, and her age is 22. That is all I know about her. I saw her picture in an illustrated paper just before I sailed, and I made up my mind I would meet her, and here I am. If she is not in Grasse, I intend to follow her to wherever she may be." He waved his pipe at the ocean before him, and recited, with mock seriousness, "Across the hills and far away, beyond their utmost purple rim, and deep into the dying day, the happy princess followed him." "Only in this case, you see," said Carlton, "I am following the happy princess." "No, but seriously, though," said Miss Morris, "what is it you mean? Are you going to paint her portrait?" "I never thought of that," exclaimed Carlton. "I don't know but what your idea is a good one. Miss Morris, that's a great idea." He shook his head approvingly. "I did not do wrong to confide in you," he said. "It was perhaps taking a liberty, but as you have not considered it as such, I am glad I spoke." "But you don't really mean to tell me," exclaimed the girl, facing about and nodding her head at him, "that you are going abroad after a woman whom you have never seen, and because you liked a picture of her in a paper?" "I do," said Carlton, "because I like her picture, and because she is a princess." "Well, upon my word," said Miss Morris, gazing at him with evident admiration, "that's what my younger brother would call a distinctly sporting proposition. Only I don't see," she added, "what her being a princess has to do with it." "You don't?" laughed Carlton easily. "That's the best part of it. That's the plot. The beauty of being in love with a princess, Miss Morris," he said, "lies in the fact that you can't marry her, that you can love her deeply and forever, and nobody will ever come to you and ask your intentions, or hint that after such a display of affection you ought to do something. Now, with a girl who is not a princess, even if she understands the situation herself and wouldn't marry you to save her life, still there is always someone, a father or a mother or one of your friends, who makes it his business to interfere, and talks about it, and bothers you both. But with a princess, you see, that is all eliminated. You can't marry a princess because they won't let you. A princess has got to marry a real royal chap, and so you are perfectly ineligible, and free to sigh for her, and make pretty speeches to her, and see her as often as you can, and revel in your devotion and unrequited affection." Miss Morris regarded him doubtfully. She did not wish to prove herself too credulous. "And you honestly want me, Mr. Carlton, to believe that you are going abroad just for this?" "You see," Carlton answered her, "if you only knew me better you would have no doubt on the subject at all. It isn't the thing some men would do, I admit, but it is exactly what anyone who knows me would expect of me. I should describe it, having had acquaintance with the young man for some time, as being eminently characteristic. And besides, think what a good story it makes. Every other man who goes abroad this summer will try to tell about his travels when he gets back to New York, and as usual, no one will listen to him. But they will have to listen to me. 'You've been across since I saw you last. What did you do?' they'll ask politely, and then, instead of simply telling them that I have been in Paris or London, I can say, 'Oh, I've been chasing around the globe after the Princess Aline of Hohenwald.' That sounds interesting, doesn't it? When you come to think of it," Carlton continued meditatively, "it is not so very remarkable. Men go all the way to Cuba and Mexico, and even to India after orchids, after a nasty flower that grows in an absurd way on the top of a tree. Why shouldn't a young man go as far as Germany after a beautiful princess who walks on the ground, and who can talk and think and feel? She is much more worth while than an orchid." Miss Morris laughed indulgently. "Well, I didn't know such devotion existed at this end of the century," she said. "It's quite nice and encouraging. I hope you will succeed, I am sure. I only wish we were going to be near enough to see how you get on. I have never been a confidante when there was a real princess concerned," she said. "It makes it so much more amusing. May one ask what your plans are?" Carlton doubted if he had any plans as yet. "I have to reach the ground first," he said, "and after that I must reconnoitre. I may possibly adopt your idea and ask to paint her portrait, only I dislike confusing my social and professional sides. As a matter of fact, though," he said after a pause, laughing guiltily, "I have done a little of that already. I prepared her, as it were, for my coming. I sent her studies of 2 pictures I made last winter in Berlin, one of the Prime Minister and one of Ludwig, the tragedian at the Court Theatre. I sent them to her through my London agent, so that she would think they had come from some one of her English friends, and I told the dealer not to let anyone know who had forwarded them. My idea was that it might help me, perhaps, if she knew something about me before I appeared in person. It was a sort of letter of introduction written by myself." "Well, really," expostulated Miss Morris, "you certainly woo in a royal way. Are you in the habit of giving away your pictures to anyone whose photograph you happen to like? That seems to me to be giving new lamps for old to a degree. I must see if I haven't some of my sister's photographs in my trunk. She is considered very beautiful." "Well, you wait until you see this particular portrait, and you will understand it better," said Carlton. The steamer reached Southampton early in the afternoon, and Carlton secured a special compartment on the express to London for Mrs. Downs and her niece and himself, with one adjoining for their maid and Nolan. It was a beautiful day, and Carlton sat with his eyes fixed upon the passing fields and villages, exclaiming with pleasure from time to time at the white roads, and the feathery trees and hedges, and the red roofs of the inns and square towers of the village churches. "Hedges are better than barbed wire fences, aren't they?" he said. "You see that girl picking wild flowers from one of them? She looks as though she were posing for a picture for an illustrated paper. She couldn't pick flowers from a barbed wire fence, could she? And there would probably be a tramp along the road somewhere to frighten her. And see, the chap in knickerbockers farther down the road leaning on the stile. I am sure he's waiting for her, and here comes a coach," he ran on. "Don't the red wheels look well against the hedges? It's a pretty little country, England, isn't it? Like a private park or a model village. I am glad to get back to it. I am glad to see the 3 and 6 signs with the little slanting dash between the shillings and pennies. Yes, even the steam rollers and the man with the red flag in front are welcome." "I suppose," said Miss Downs, "it's because one has been so long on the ocean that the ride to London seems so interesting. It always pays me for the entire trip. Yes," she said with a sigh, "in spite of the patent medicine signs they have taken to putting up all along the road. It seems a pity they should adopt our bad habits instead of our good ones." "They are a bit slow at adopting anything," commented Carlton. "Did you know, Mrs. Downs, that electric lights are still as scarce in London as they are in Timbuktu? Why, I saw an electric light plant put up in a western town in 3 days once. There were over 100 burners in one saloon, and the engineer who put them up told me in confidence that—" What the chief engineer told him in confidence was never disclosed, for at that moment Miss Morris interrupted him with a sudden sharp exclamation. "Oh, Mr. Carlton!" she exclaimed breathlessly. Listen to this." She had been reading one of the dozen papers which Carlton had purchased at the station, and was now shaking one of them at him, with her eyes fixed on the open page. "My dear Edith," remonstrated her aunt, "Mr. Carlton was telling us—" "Yes, I know," exclaimed Miss Morris, laughing, "but this interests him much more than electric lights. Who do you think is in London?" she cried, raising her eyes to his, and pausing for proper dramatic effect. "The Princess Aline of Hohenwald." "No!" shouted Carlton. "Yes!" Miss Morris answered, mocking his tone. "Listen. The Queen's drawing room. On her right was the Princess of Wales. Oh, I can't find it. No, yes, here it is. Next to her stood the Princess Aline of Hohenwald. She wore a dress of white silk, with train of silver brocade trimmed with fur, ornaments, emeralds and diamonds, orders, Victoria and Albert, Jubilee Commemoration Medal, Coburg and Gotha, and Hohenwald and Grasse. "By Jove!" cried Carlton excitedly. "I say, is that really there? Let me see it, please, for myself." Miss Morris handed him the paper, with her finger on the paragraph, and picking up another, began a search down its columns. "You're right," exclaimed Carlton, solemnly. "It's she, sure enough, and here I've been within 2 hours of her and didn't know it." Miss Morris gave another triumphant cry, as though she had discovered a vein of gold. "Yes, and here she is again," she said, "in the Gentlewoman. The Queen's dress was of black as usual, but relieved by a few violet ribbons in the bonnet, and Princess Beatrice, who sat by her mother's side, showed but little trace of the anxiety caused by Princess Ena's accident. Princess Aline on the front seat, in a light brown jacket and a becoming bonnet, gave the necessary touch to a picture which Londoners would be glad to look upon more often." Carlton sat staring forward, with his hands on his knees, and with his eyes open wide from excitement. He presented so unusual an appearance of bewilderment and delight that Mrs. Downs looked at him and her niece for some explanation. "The young lady seems to interest you," said she, tentatively. "She is the most charming creature in the world, Mrs. Downs," cried Carlton, "and I was going all the way to Grasse to see her, and now it turns out that she is here in England, within a few miles of us." He turned and waved his hands at the passing landscape. "Every minute brings us nearer together." "And you didn't feel it in the air?" mocked Miss Morris, laughing. "You are a pretty poor sort of a man to let a girl tell you where to find the woman you love." Carlton did not answer, but stared at her very seriously and frowned intently. "Now I have got to begin all over again and readjust things," he said. "We might have guessed she would be in London, on account of this royal wedding. It is a great pity it isn't later in the season, when there would be more things going on and more chances of meeting her. Now they will all be interested in themselves, and being extremely exclusive, no one who isn't a cousin to the bridegroom or an emperor would have any chance at all. Still, I can see her, I can look at her, and that's something." "It is better than a photograph, anyway," said Miss Morris. "They will be either at Buckingham Palace or at Windsor, so they will stop at Brown's," said Carlton. "All royalties go to Brown's. I don't know why, unless it is because it's so expensive, or maybe it is expensive because royalties go there, but in any event, if they are not at the palace, that is where they will be, and that is where I shall have to go too." When the train drew up at Victoria Station, Carlton directed Nolan to take his things to Brown's Hotel, but not to unload them until he had arrived. Then he drove with the ladies to Cox's, and saw them settled there. He promised to return at once to dine, and to tell them what he had discovered in his absence. "You've got to help me in this, Miss Morris," he said nervously. "I am beginning to feel that I am not worthy of her." "Oh, yes, you are," she said, laughing. "But don't forget that it's not the lover who comes to woo, but the lover's way of wooing, and that faint heart and the rest of it." "Yes, I know," said Carlton, doubtfully. "But it's a bit sudden, isn't it?" "Oh, I am ashamed of you. You are frightened." "No, not frightened exactly," said the painter. "I think it's just natural emotion." As Carlton turned into Albemarle Street, he noticed a red carpet stretching from the doorway of Brown's Hotel out across the sidewalk to a carriage, and a bare-headed man bustling about apparently assisted several gentlemen to get into it. This and another carriage and Nolan's four-wheeler blocked the way, but without waiting for them to move up, Carlton leaned out of his hansom and called the bare-headed man to his side. "Is the Duke of Hohenwald stopping at your hotel?" he asked. The bare-headed man answered that he was. "All right, Nolan," cried Carlton. "They can take in the trunks." Hearing this, the bare-headed man hastened to help Carlton to alight. "That was the Duke who just drove off, sir, and those," he said, pointing to three muffled figures who were stepping into a second carriage, "are his sisters, the princesses." Carlton stopped midway, with one foot on the step and the other in the air. "The deuce they are!" he exclaimed. "And which is—" he began, eagerly, and then remembering himself, dropped back on the cushions of the hansom. He broke into the little dining-room at Cox's in so excited a state that two dignified old gentlemen who were eating there sat open-mouthed in astonished disapproval. Mrs. Downs and Miss Morris had just come downstairs. "I have seen her!" Carlton cried, ecstatically. "Only half an hour in the town, and I've seen her already." "No, really?" exclaimed Miss Morris. "And how did she look? Is she as beautiful as you expected?" "Well, I can't tell yet," Carlton answered. "There were three of them, and they were all muffled up, and which one of the three she was I don't know. She wasn't labelled as in the picture, but she was there, and I saw her. The woman I love was one of that three, and I have engaged rooms at the hotel, and this very night the same roof shelters us both." End of chapter 1, part 3.